On the ill-fated day, fate stripped him of his job with only a worn suitcase in hand and a fragile hope in his heart. He made his way along the winding stone path to his only son's luxurious mansion. Decades of impeccable service lay behind him, severed by a single stroke of a pen. His pockets were nearly empty, and ahead lay a bleak unknown. In a moment of despair, he believed family was a haven where he could find support and understanding. Yet, when Lucas opened the door, not a trace of sympathy reflected in his eyes. Instead of a warm greeting, there was only a contemptuous stare, as if he stood before a bothersome beggar, not his father. "Father, what are you doing here?" Lucas's sharp question cut through the air, a crooked smirk fixed on his face. The father tried to maintain his composure, gathering the last shreds of his dignity. "I just need a place to stay for a while. I'll sort things out soon," he said, hoping for understanding. "I thought you might be able to help me." A heavy silence followed, suddenly broken by a chilling laugh. It wasn't genuine, heartwarming laughter, but a cold, dismissive cackle that sent shivers down his spine. "You're just a worthless old fool," Lucas retorted mercilessly, as if his father's entire life amounted to nothing. Without another word, he slammed the door shut in his father's face. The man stood stunned, gazing at the polished wood, feeling a growing pain in his chest as his son's words echoed in his head. Lucas had no idea that just hours earlier, his father had hit the jackpot, matching all the numbers on a lottery ticket for a staggering $8.5 million. He didn't know that the father he had just humiliated had in an instant become one of the wealthiest men in the state. And in that moment, standing utterly alone on the doorstep of his only son's mansion, he made a decision that would forever change both their lives. Before that fateful day, his life had been simple and unassuming, but he was proud of it, having earned everything through his own hard work. For 34 years, he dedicated himself to a manufacturing plant on the edge of town, starting as a simple worker, full of enthusiasm and determination to provide for his beloved wife Claire. She was his high school sweetheart, his one and only, the woman who taught him that even in the darkest times, kindness and compassion held immense importance. Together, they built a modest but cozy home with a porch that creaked melodically underfoot. The house was small, but every corner held priceless memories. The scent of apple pie Claire baked in the fall, her gentle humming of old country songs while ironing, her unwavering desire to plant tulips in the front yard every spring, despite them never blooming for long. This house was their fortress, not because of its size, but because of the love that resided within its walls. When Lucas was born, he felt his world become complete and perfect. His son had Claire's eyes, perceptive and radiant, and a stubbornness that reminded him of himself. He dreamed that Lucas would grow up to be proud of his father, understanding that a person's worth was defined not by wealth, but by hard work, honesty, and love for family. But life, alas, doesn't always unfold as planned. Claire fell ill when Lucas was in college. Cancer crept in unnoticed, like a thief in the night, and just a year later, he stood at her grave, clutching his son's hand, trying to be strong for him, though his own heart was breaking with grief. After Claire's death, Lucas became more distant and withdrawn. He immersed himself in his studies, then in his career, striving for corporate heights, closing lucrative deals, and surrounding himself with people who measured success by expensive cars and luxurious apartments. He barely recognized his son anymore. Nevertheless, he continued to toil at the factory, day in and day out, year after year, arriving at work by 6 in the morning, checking equipment, assigning shifts, and troubleshooting problems when production lines broke down. He naively believed that loyalty and dedication to the company meant something, that if he worked hard and gave his all, the company would reciprocate. How wrong he was. That fateful morning, when he was called into the director's office, he thought it would be about overtime or another safety briefing. Instead, the plant director, a man half his age who had worked there barely 5 years, informed him that the company was moving in a new direction, and his position was being eliminated, effective immediately. No severance, no pension increase, just a dry handshake and a strained smile that did nothing to soften the blow. He left the office with an empty heart. His entire life had been intertwined with that place. He had invested his energy, his time, and his loyalty into it. And now, in a single moment, everything had collapsed. At 58 years old, the chances of starting over were negligible. Employers wanted young, energetic individuals with degrees from prestigious universities, not men with calloused hands and graying hair. He sat in his car in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the steering wheel, trying to comprehend what to do next. Losing his job plunged him into a state of uncertainty, forcing him to ponder his next steps. At home, unpaid bills awaited him. The mortgage was behind him, but utility payments, grocery expenses, and treatment for his ailing knee continued to climb relentlessly each month. His savings were modest, as a significant portion had gone towards Lucas's college tuition, and then the down payment for his son's own apartment. He never regretted this, considering it an inherent part of a father's duty. His only remaining relatives, besides Lucas, were Claire's sister, her daughter Margaret, and her son Daniel. They were kind and compassionate people, but he didn't want to burden them with his problems. Margaret was dedicated to her work as a nurse, and Daniel was just beginning his career as a teacher. He decided not to trouble them with his difficulties. Only one option remained, to turn to Lucas, his son, his own flesh and blood. He convinced himself it was temporary, just until he sorted things out. His son had plenty of space. Driving past Lucas's luxurious mansion, he counted no fewer than 6 bedrooms and 3 garages. Surely he could spare a room for his father, even for a short while. As he drove to the neighborhood where his son lived, thoughts swirled in his head. He reminded himself that Lucas was still his son, that beneath the mask of arrogance he sometimes glimpsed, there was the boy who once held his hand at his mother's grave. The drive felt endless. Pulling up to the gates, he paused, gazing at the house. White stone walls, enormous glass windows, the kind you'd see in a glossy magazine. He got out of his truck, adjusting his old suitcase filled with clothes and personal belongings. His hands trembled not from the weight of his burden, but from nervous tension. Pride was a heavy load, and he tried to swallow it as he stood before the house. He pressed the doorbell, waited, and heard a faint chime pierce through the massive doors. His heart pounded in his chest. He recalled Claire's words, to hold his head high and remember that asking for help from his own child was not a sign of weakness, but a manifestation of family bonds. Taking a deep breath, he whispered, "It's temporary. He'll understand." But when the door opened, all his notions of family, loyalty, and love began to crumble. Lucas stood there in a custom-tailored shirt, sleeves neatly rolled to his elbows, a golden watch gleaming in the sun. He looked like the successful businessman he had always aspired to be. For a moment, the father hoped his son would smile, invite him in, and ask if everything was all right. Instead, Lucas's eyes narrowed, as if he was trying to figure out what his father was doing at his door. "Dad," he said in a sharp tone, "what are you doing here?" The father shifted the suitcase from one hand to the other, suddenly realizing how out of place he looked against the polished marble entrance. His voice sounded more confident than he felt. "I need a place to stay for a while. I lost my job. It won't be long. I'll figure something out." Lucas raised an eyebrow in surprise. He studied his father, then let out a short, joyless, rather contemptuous laugh. "You lost your job, Dad? And what do you do? Just show up here like this? You can't just arrive and expect me to take you in?" The father swallowed hard, feeling the blood rush to his face. "I'm not asking for much. Just a roof over my head until I get back on my feet. I was always there for you." Lucas cut him off. "Always there for me. You gave me a middle-class life in a small house and kept telling me that hard work was the only thing that mattered. Look at me, Dad. Look at this place. I built this because I refused to settle for that. I refused to end up like you." His son's words hit him like blows. His chest tightened, and he struggled to catch his breath. He remembered Claire, her belief in kindness, in love, in supporting people rather than tearing them down. He regretted that she couldn't see her son now, though perhaps it was for the best. It was for the best that she couldn't. "Lucas," he said softly, "I dedicated my life to providing you with everything I possibly could. I sacrificed a great deal so you could get a college education, so you could build your life. Now, I'm only asking for a little help until I get back on my feet." Lucas's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, his tone growing even sharper. "That's the whole problem. You never aimed for more. You thought working at the factory was the pinnacle of ambition. You thought simply providing basic needs was enough. You never instilled ambition in me. You never showed me what it truly means to prosper. And now you show up here with your suitcase, expecting me to clean up your messes." The man felt the blood drain from his face. "Messes? Is that what you think of me?" Lucas shrugged, his face almost bored. "You're almost 60, unemployed, and have no savings worth mentioning. What else would you call it? You're not an asset, father. You're a liability." The words hung in the air. He stood on the doorstep, clutching his suitcase tightly, holding back the storm of anger and pain rising in his chest. His son, the boy he once held when he cried, the boy he worked double shifts for, stood before him, looking at him like an uninvited guest who had overstayed his welcome. "I don't need you," Lucas declared dismissively, "and I don't want you here. You should have planned your life better. You should have thought about your future instead of expecting others to take care of you." He made a final attempt. "Lucas, I'm not asking you to take care of me. I'm asking you to remember that I'm your father." His son smirked bitterly. "Father. Fathers are supposed to be role models. You taught me to settle for less. I had to unlearn that to get where I am now. You're just a worthless old fool, Dad. You always were." These words wounded him more deeply than anything he had ever heard in his life. His chest constricted, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed his heart. Before he could respond, Lucas slammed the door. The sound echoed down the quiet street, leaving him alone on the porch with his suitcase at his feet. He stood, numb, staring at the polished wood of the door, the sting of Lucas's words burning in his ears. His legs felt like cotton, his hands numb. A neighbor walking their dog passed by, casting a fleeting glance before looking away, as if embarrassed for him. He felt humiliated, standing there like a beggar at his own son's mansion. Slowly he turned and trudged back down the driveway. Each step was an effort. Memories flooded his mind, nights he stayed up comforting Lucas after nightmares. Christmas mornings when he'd saved for months to buy him a coveted toy, the pride in his son's eyes on graduation day. He remembered all the sacrifices, big and small, he had made to give him the life Lucas now used as a weapon against him. Anger surged within him, but with it, sorrow. Anger that his son was so blind, sorrow at his callousness. He commanded himself not to cry, but the telltale burning in his eyes betrayed him. By the time he reached his old truck, a tear had escaped down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, ashamed of his weakness, though no one saw. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gripping the steering wheel with whitened knuckles. His son's words replayed in his head, "Worthless old fool." He whispered them aloud, as if testing how they sounded from his own lips. The bitterness was unbearable, but through it, something else was breaking through. A faint, yet persistent spark of determination, like a flame waiting for oxygen. Lucas was certain he had slammed the door shut forever. He had no idea that fate had just handed his father a chance to prove his worth in a way he could never have imagined. He drove away from his son's mansion with a heaviness in his chest that words couldn't express. His son's rejection wounded him more deeply than losing his job. A job could be found again. Money could be earned again. But a son who slammed the door in his father's face and called him worthless left a wound that might never heal. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. Still, he kept driving, unsure of his destination. With no clear path forward, he simply followed the road. After a few miles, he turned into a quiet park, a place he and Claire had often visited in their youth. They used to sit on the wooden benches, enjoying coffee and watching the vibrant life around them, children playing and couples holding hands tenderly. Stopping his truck, he got out and sat on one of those benches. The setting sun painted the grass in warm, golden hues. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and suddenly, a memory of the lottery ticket flashed through his mind. That morning, before everything fell apart, he had checked the numbers on the crumpled ticket he'd bought a week earlier. All the numbers matched, $8.5 million. At first, he thought it was a mistake, but after triple-checking his heart pounding, he realized the reality. He had won. However, then came the call from the office, the humiliating dismissal, and the shameful walk with a box of his belongings through the factory gates. In that chaos, the win had faded into the background, becoming a strange and almost irrelevant fact. His thoughts had been focused on survival, on future plans, and now on Lucas's cruel rejection. Sitting on the bench, he pulled the ticket from his wallet and stared at it. $8.5 million. This should have been a cause for joy, but he felt only a whirlpool of grief and confusion. He imagined returning to Lucas's mansion, waving the ticket in his face, and watching his arrogance crumble. He envisioned the shock, and perhaps even regret, as Lucas realized that the man he had just humiliated was richer than he could have ever imagined. Yet, the longer he sat, the more repulsive the idea became. Revenge might bring instant gratification, but what then? Would he want to live under the same roof as someone who had so easily belittled him? Would he want to let his son know that the money he worshipped was now at his disposal, thereby giving him yet another reason to see him merely as a tool, not a father? No, that was not what he wanted. Claire's words echoed in his heart. She had always said that money was a tool, not an end, and that it should be used for building, not for causing harm. He remembered her smile, her hand clutching his during tough times, and he realized she would have hated the thought of him wasting this chance on bitterness. He made a decision. He wouldn't tell Lucas, at least not yet. Instead, he would build something new. He would use this gift not to prove his worth to Lucas, but to prove to himself that Lucas's words were a lie. He was not worthless. He had worked hard his entire life, raised his son, and loved his family. That mattered, even if Lucas refused to see it. He thought of Margaret and Daniel. They had always been kind and treated him with respect. Daniel still warmly called him Uncle Ethan, and Margaret never forgot to offer him a slice of pie or bring a warm meal during the holidays. They gave selflessly, expecting nothing in return. He decided they would be the first people he would help. He also thought of the factory workers, the men and women who had given years of their lives to a company that would discard them as easily as it had discarded him. He thought of the town, of the crumbling schools, and the library that had closed 2 years ago due to lack of funds. Perhaps he could make a difference. Perhaps he could use this win and turn it into something greater than himself. The more he thought about it, the stronger he became. The pain from Lucas's words was still sharp and fresh, but beneath it, a quiet determination grew. He would not let Lucas define him. He would not let Lucas's coldness determine his worth. That evening, he returned to his modest home, sat at the kitchen table, and began to make a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He wrote down the debts that needed to be paid, the repairs his house needed, and the investments he could make to ensure stability. Then he made a second list, the people he wanted to help, the projects he wanted to support, the ways he could give back. By the time he put down his pen, he could breathe easier. The shame that had weighed on him all day began to recede. For the first time in many years, he felt something akin to hope. Not just because of the money, but because he had a choice. He didn't have to beg from a son who despised him. He didn't have to accept his son's definition of his worth. He had the power to create something new, to live a life full of dignity and purpose. The next morning, he cashed the ticket. As the bank teller confirmed the numbers and the transfer was initiated, a steady calm washed over him. Transformation and triumph. He left that building internally transformed. No longer was he the man Lucas had mocked. Now, he was driven by a resolve to prove through action, not words, that a person's true worth is defined by their deeds, not by others' opinions. And though Lucas didn't realize it yet, time would reveal all, and he would see his father's true self. A week later, he stood before a mirror, carefully adjusting the collar of his new suit. The suit was elegant, understated, and fit flawlessly, as if compelling him to stand tall. Years spent in a factory uniform, smelling of machine oil and sweat, were now in the past. Before the mirror stood a man reborn, and it wasn't the expensive fabric that mattered, but the burning resolve in his heart. That evening, a charity gala was held at the city's community center to support local schools, which had long struggled financially. Days earlier, he had anonymously donated a sum that not only met the campaign's goals, but significantly exceeded them. This was his way of beginning to build a better future, a future Claire would have been proud of. As he stepped into the brightly lit hall, he felt eyes turn towards him. Some faces showed surprise, others curiosity. Many of the ladies and gentlemen present remembered him only as a humble foreman, hard-working and inconspicuous, distinguished by neither wealth nor high status. But now, the host introduced him as the benefactor who had, overnight, changed the future of the city's education system. The microphone was handed to him. A slight tremor ran through his fingers, but his voice remained firm and confident. "Thank you," he began, scanning the assembled crowd. "I never imagined I would stand here one day, speaking to you. For most of my life, I was an ordinary worker, toiling in the factory, returning home tired, and striving to provide for my family. I was neither rich nor influential, but I always believed in hard work and the power of love." He paused, letting his words sink into the hearts of the listeners. "This city gave me a home, loyal friends, caring neighbors, and a true family. And though few blood ties remain, I still believe that family is more than just a shared last name. It's those who support you in difficult times. That is why I made this donation. The children of this city deserve the very best. They deserve inspiring schools, teachers equipped with everything they need to succeed, and a future full of opportunities." The hall erupted in applause. In the doorway, he noticed Margaret and Daniel, their faces beaming with pride. A warm wave spread through his chest. For the first time in many years, he felt truly seen, not as an ordinary worker or a discarded employee, but as a man whose decisions mattered. And then, in the back of the hall, he saw him. Lucas. He had come with several business partners, likely drawn by the event's prestige and the opportunity to make useful connections. As always, he was impeccably dressed, his hair carefully slicked back, a confident expression on his face. But when his gaze fell upon his father, standing at the podium, something shifted. His confidence wavered. His mouth slightly parted, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. The host continued, introducing him as the donor who had given millions for the future of the schools. A gasp of astonishment swept through the hall, heads turning in his direction. Some applauded louder, others whispered in admiration. He felt the moment freeze in the air, filled with a mix of pride, triumph, and sadness. He looked directly at Lucas. Their eyes met. For a moment, the room disappeared, and only the two of them remained, father and son, bound by blood, yet divided by life's choices. Lucas looked stunned, as if the ground had fallen out from under him. He concluded his speech with one last most important message. A person's worth is not measured by the amount of money earned or the size of the walls built around oneself. Worth is measured by what you give, the love you share, and the lives you touch. This is what defines a person's true essence. The hall was swept by a wave of ovations. Returning the microphone, the speaker descended the stage, feeling his heart pound. On his way to Margaret and Daniel, many people rushed to shake his hand, express their gratitude, and offer friendly pats on the shoulder. Each of these gestures seemed to erase the pain Lucas had inflicted. Just as he reached the exit, Lucas intercepted him, his face deathly pale, the mask of self-assurance cracked. "Dad," Lucas whispered, "I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me?" Maintaining his composure, the father looked at him. "I wanted you to see me for who I truly am, not through the lens of my wealth. And you showed me exactly what I needed to see." Lucas opened his mouth again, intending to speak, but his father gestured for him to stop. "It's not about you, Lucas. Not anymore. It's about living a life with dignity, about creating something meaningful. That's the path I've chosen. You made your choice when you slammed the door right in my face." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Lucas's eyes, as if a crack had appeared in his impenetrable wall of arrogance. He clearly wanted to say more, but his father, head held high and heart firm, walked past him. Stepping out into the fresh night air, he felt a relief he hadn't experienced in years. He had not only revealed the truth about his wealth, but had done so in a way that aligned with his true self and Claire's belief in him. The boy who had once mocked him now saw him in his full stature. And it wasn't just about the riches, but about the strength of spirit that allowed him to rise above contempt. The night sky stretched above him, and for the first time since Claire's passing, he felt at peace. After the gala concluded, he returned to his modest home with its creaky porch and peeling paint. However, it felt different now. For years he had crossed the threshold of that house, carrying the burden of fatigue and worries. But that night, he entered with a sense of clarity and an understanding of his place in the world, knowing how he wanted to spend his remaining time. The next morning, he contacted Margaret and Daniel, inviting them over. When they arrived, Daniel, as always, greeted him warmly, exclaiming, "Uncle Ethan," and enveloped him in a hug. Margaret, as a gesture of her care, placed a casserole on the table. They had no idea of the decision he had made until he sat them down at the kitchen table and informed them of his desire to secure Daniel's future and ease Margaret's life. Margaret initially resisted, shaking her head and saying, "Ethan, you've always given more than you could. You shouldn't do this." But looking her in the eyes, he replied, "I should. Because family always takes care of each other. You were there for me when I had nothing. This isn't charity. It's an act of love." Tears welled in her eyes, and she finally nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. In the following weeks, he began to implement his plans. He established scholarships at the local school, helped restore the library's operations, and contributed to the renovation of the community center. Each time he saw a smiling child with a new backpack or a teacher sighing with relief at having necessary supplies, he felt the shattered pieces of his heart mending. He was no longer the man rejected by a company or betrayed by his son. He had become a man creating a legacy more valuable than any mansion or luxury car. As for Lucas, rumors of the donations and his father's new role in society spread quickly. He tried to contact him several times, first sending short messages asking to talk, then making longer calls where his voice sounded agitated. Ethan initially ignored them, not out of malice but out of a need for personal space. He needed to ensure that if he ever spoke to his son again, it would be from a position of strength, not weakness. He watched Lucas intently, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't see the stern, embittered man who had shut him out, but the very boy he had once raised. "Lucas," he said, "I don't need apologies for financial support or a place to stay. I craved respect, the reverence a son should show his father, regardless of life's circumstances. You turned away from me when I needed your support most, and that can't simply be smoothed over with words." Lucas bowed his head, shame etched on his face. "I understand that," he replied. "I'm just asking for another chance." The father leaned back in his chair and took a sip of coffee. "The opportunity for a new start isn't up to me, but to the life path you choose. If you truly want to mend our relationship, you'll have to prove it with your actions, not just words, and it won't be easy." Lucas nodded silently, and with that, the conversation ended. The future of their relationship remained uncertain, but for the first time, the father didn't feel a desperate need for his son's approval. He had found his worth, a worth that didn't depend on Lucas's recognition. Life gradually settled into a familiar rhythm. He restored his old house, but kept its modest appearance, eschewing extravagance. He preferred the creaking porch and the tulip bed Claire once tended. These details reminded him of his roots and who he had always been. On weekends, he spent time with Margaret and Daniel, enjoying laughter, shared meals, and the warmth of a family that had never turned away from him. Reflecting on the events of the past weeks, he realized an important truth. Losing his job wasn't the end of his life. His son's rejection didn't define his identity. The lottery win didn't save him. His salvation came from his own decision to rise, to create something meaningful, and to believe in himself, even when others had lost faith. On the day Lucas slammed the door in his face, he thought he had lost everything. But in reality, it was the day he freed himself from dependence on others' approval. It was the day he began to live for something greater than pride or wealth. Now, walking through town and seeing the open library doors, watching children hurrying with new books in their hands, and hearing teachers talk about hopes for the future, he understood the truth. His worth was never determined by the size of his paycheck or his son's opinion. It was defined by the love he gave, the sacrifices he made, and the lives he touched. And that was a lesson he learned forever. Dignity doesn't depend on what others say about you, but on how you choose to live, even when the world tries to break you. That day, he grasped the harshest truth. Sometimes the closest people can let you down, but that doesn't make you worthless. It simply means you need to find the strength within yourself, maintain your dignity, and live on, despite those who try to break you.